Is it possible for paranormal activity to be witnessed and documented by multiple observers? When two paranormal researchers investigate a Culver City woman who claims unseen beings are attacking her and her family, they witness a number of startling phenomena. What do they find? Mind-blowing revelations that remain fascinating even 50 years later. Also, Haunted Hollywood Hour co-host Tanya Dickson visits the room Marilyn Monroe lived in when she was just 10 years old. Some say the room is haunted. Stay tuned for Tanya's full report. We also experience our own encounters with the unexplained while recording this very episode. Coincidences or actual woo? You be the judge. A mild trigger warning. This week's episode does mention things that may be upsetting to those triggered by mentions of SA. Please take care on this week's episode of Haunted Hollywood Hour. Everyone, and welcome. I'm Carly Heath, a writer in Los Angeles, and I'm here with Tanya Dickson.
Hi, Carly.
My friend, my neighbor, who's also a writer and actor. This week, we're bringing you two fascinating tales from Southern California history. One is an extremely well-documented paranormal story that will knock your socks off. I could have sworn as soon as I was saying that the light flickered.
It did.
It did. You saw it too?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
The other is a tale of the early days of a cultural icon. Before we begin, we like to start this off with talking about our spookiest things that have happened recently, but I just want to tell the audience that I have been personally experiencing poltergeist-like phenomena with lights flickering at my house, and I'm like, okay, so that's interesting. I come to this house. I'm at a different location. I'm not at my apartment right now. And I walk in the door earlier and the light starts flickering. Then as soon as I was talking about that little beginning intro, the light started flickering.
I'm your witness.
And you saw it.
I saw it both times. And the timing is just a little too coincidental.
So that's my spooky thing that happened recently. Tanya, what's your spooky thing that happened recently?
Spooky / comforting. You know how sometimes we can have both? My late father loved Jaguars. My dream was to always buy him a Jaguar, and I told you about that.
I know the story. That's why
the story.
That's why I'm getting you to tell the story.
Yeah. No, it's a sweet thing, though. And, as we all go through our trials and tribulations of life, sometimes we need a totem. Sometimes we need something to hang on to, literally. And you had said, watch out for the Jaguars. Your dad is with you.
I said, I told you that your dad will send messages that he's around, watching over you.
Yep.
He will send you green Jaguars because green is his favorite color and Jaguar was his favorite car. I said, pay attention to green Jaguars. And guess what? You are seeing green Jaguars.
I'm seeing green Jaguars, especially during a difficult time in my life. But since then, I still have seen them. And not only that, Carly, you found me a itsy bitsy green Jaguar that says Jaguar, a little Hot Wheels car.
And not just found in a normal place where you would find like a child's
Yeah, where was
toy.
that again?
I was walking up the street to go see my sheep. Yeah, because I have sheep. I was crossing a bridge and on the ground was a little tiny green car, and this was after I told Tanya to watch out for Jaguars, and I pick it up and it says Jaguar on the side. It's like a kid's toy Matchbox car, and I take a picture of it and I send it to Tanya, and you got that picture when you were in the middle of meditation. You were meditating.
Yeah, I was meditating at that moment, which I had not been doing for a while, and I was just getting back to it and needed a sign that I should be doing this. Amazing. And my picture came in on my text. That was incredible. And it means a lot to me. So it is my little totem. I keep it. It's, I pick it up, I hold it, and I just feel my dad. You know, you just...
And when we went to Trader Joe's the other day, there was a Jaguar in front of us.
There was a Jaguar. And then, there's not that many Jaguars. And, we're in LA, you probably see more. But for the most part, I hadn't seen Jaguar.
Did you see the light flickered again?
Oh, I closed my eyes for a hot second.
Yeah.
Did it flicker?
Yeah.
I believe you. I have no doubts. There's some flickering going on, people.
So as you can tell, we are into the woo. And
the woo-woo.
We're going to tell you the stories that captivate and fascinate us. And let's get to our first story.
Can't wait to hear it.
This is one of the most well-documented paranormal stories of all time, where activity was observed and confirmed by upwards of 30 people. It's a story that also gives us a chance to cover the extremely interesting parapsychology lab at UCLA that was in operation from the 1960s to 1978.
Where did you discover this story? Like how did you stumble upon this?
This is one of those online spooky, I don't know where I first heard the story. It was made into a book and a movie.
Okay.
So I think it's one of those like cultural phenomenon things that like I knew about, but I wanted to like research more of. So I went online and did the Google search. So gird your butts, because I'm going to tell you about Doris Bither and the entity at 11547 Braddock Drive in Culver City.
Wow, Culver City. Okay, so there's just haunted stuff all over Southern California.
Let's take a skip back in time to August 1974. The top film of the year is The Exorcist. Folks are tuning in to All in the Family on CBS and Sanford and Son on NBC.
Yes.
The Amityville murders of the DeFeo family will happen in November of that year. In fact, 1974, the year our favorite comedian Rhys Darby was born, was dubbed the Year of Fear, with a number of serial killers all getting their start. John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Dennis Rader, who is BTK, Coral Watts, Paul Knowles.
Wow.
In fact, by 1974, FBI Special Agent Howard Tetton had already established the behavior science unit at Quantico. So this, if you watched Mindhunter,
yes,
like that's the vibe that we're going with. Helter Skelter, which is one of my all-time favorite books, the definitive book about the Manson murders by Vincent Bugliosi, was published in 1974.
Wow.
Okay. 1974, big year. This was also the month where Nixon resigned because of the Watergate scandal. And it was a decade, the 1970s, where women demanded equality. And the year before, 1973, Billie Jean King defeated Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes tennis match. So this is the cultural phenomena that's happening at this time. Our story begins with two paranormal researchers, Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor, who are at a local bookstore looking up paranormal books. Carrie was a student in philosophy, but had an interest in psychology and would eventually go on to be a hypnotherapist to a number of high-profile people.
Wow.
You go to his website, go to Carrie Gaynor's website. He has the Carrie Gaynor method, and he helps people overcome addiction and all their fears. In fact, he helps people overcome their fear of flying with hypnotism.
You know, I deal with that.
Yeah.
And
So
I've been hypnotized for it.
So I saw that. I saw on his website, Fear of Flying, and I'm like, wow, I was drawn to
That's, again, people, no accidents.
This is something that Tanya can help with. So Barry Taff had a PhD in psychophysiology with a minor in biomedical engineering. He helped found UCLA's first parapsychology lab in the 60s. In his career, he's investigated 4,500 paranormal cases, and Barry and Carrie were trained by Dr. Thelma Moss, known as the parapsychologist to the stars. Thelma Moss, I want to do a whole episode on Thelma Moss. Her life story is the most interesting thing I have ever heard in my entire life. She was one of the first members of the Actors Studio. She was an actor and screenwriter. She was a working screenwriter. She had scripts that she wrote become movies. Check out her Wikipedia page. That was her life for decades, Hollywood, acting, writing, and she had a really hard time with, I think just a month after her child was born, her husband died, and she went through profound depression. She had 2 suicide attempts and she survived both of them. And then she began having therapy with LSD and had a spiritual awakening thanks to LSD. And she was like, I want to devote my life to this. So she said, goodbye Hollywood, goodbye screenwriting and acting. I am going to get my PhD in psychology.
And how old was she at that time?
This was decades after her career had started. So she's like late in life. She's like, I am going to study psychology. She really got into the woo. She invented aura photography.
Wow.
Yeah. And she led the parapsychology lab in the 1960s and 1970s. Now, she was born in 1918, and then in the 1960s and 1970s, she's like leading the So what a major cultural shift she experienced in her life. Going from 1918, women don't even have the right to vote yet, to the 1970s, which is women fighting for equality, and also us opening our minds to the possibilities with psychedelics and
women weren't even allowed to learn to swim back then. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
They were not allowed to swim because they thought that it was a health risk. So men were allowed to compete and have swim teams. And I just saw an amazing film about that, The Young Woman in the Sea. And it's a new film. If you guys are looking for something inspiring, please go see that. And it's true. Women weren't even allowed to swim. So
I remember there was that story like way back in the day of a woman swimming the English Channel.
That was her.
Oh, that was her. Okay.
Trudy Edley, I believe it was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And what year was that?
24.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Exactly 100 years ago.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So back to Thelma, I encourage you all to check out her Wikipedia page. It's fascinating. And a little bit more about the parapsychology lab first. So in an interview I found, Carrie Gaynor describes the paranormal interests that had captivated the public and academia in the 1970s as it was an exciting period of time. Things go in trends. And in the 70s, there was a tremendous interest in parapsychology. We were getting calls and letters every day. We were hearing about this kind of phenomenon from all around the country and all around the world. UCLA's parapsychology lab wasn't funded by UCLA, but it was allowed to operate in the Neuropsychiatric Institute, which is now called the Semel Institute, on the 5th floor. And Thelma Moss was the head of everything. Because the lab wasn't sanctioned by UCLA, it was at odds with the university administration. And Barry Taff, who is the main guy that we're going to be focusing on in our story, he got involved because he felt that he had psychic abilities, and he was there originally as a research participant. They were researching him and his psychic abilities. And later he would be running experiments called psi development, in which researchers would try to develop psychic abilities in otherwise normal people. And I think you can develop psychic abilities. I think especially like LA, Hollywood, creative types, I think us people who like write and perform and do things, I think we kind of have...
Yeah, we're right-brained. We lean towards...
We have a lot of trauma. Let's face it.
Artists are known for that. And from there, the art rises. And I also think there's not only that, but I think artists have a wider interest in all things unique and weird and different.
Heads all the time.
Yes. So I think that makes sense that someone like that would have because let's face it, there's a lot of folks that don't believe any of this.
I know. And it sounds like what happened was this new guy, Dr. Louis Jolion West. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I didn't even look it up. But he came in as chairman of the neuropsychiatric lab, and he walked into the lab one day and said, "This is the end, guys." And he didn't believe in any of it. So it got shut down in 1978, which is a shame because I think UCLA, being in the hub of entertainment industry, every single person in the industry who I know is into the weird stuff.
Yeah. Everybody has a crystal in their pocket that's in the industry. Pretty close.
Every time I get on an Uber, I always ask my Uber driver if they seem like a cool person and not like a weirdo. Well, not a weirdo someone who's going to get all up in my business. But I always ask them, have you ever had a paranormal experience? And every single Uber driver I have ever asked this question to has a involved story about a paranormal experience that they had.
There's a book. There's an entire segment.
I know, right?
Wow.
Uber drivers who I talk to and their paranormal stories.
Para-Uber.
Lift your consciousness.
Uber normal. We could go on all day.
So those are our key parapsychology research players. Now we introduce the woman at the center of it all. Doris Bither is a young, frail, thin, 30-year-old woman she approaches these researchers as they're at this local bookstore, and she's like, I heard you guys talking about this paranormal stuff. I'm having issues with a paranormal entity at my home. Can you help me with this? And I assume that they're like me and they're like, hell yeah, show us your entity.
How are you not a parapsychologist, Carly?
Well, I wasn't aware that this could be a job that people could do. So I'm going to podcast about it.
There you go.
Maybe. But they show up at this house in Culver City. And this house back then in 1974, it was an absolute dump. It was allegedly condemned by the city, although I read an interview with the grown adult son of Doris Bither, and he's like, no, it was never condemned, but it did look really, really bad. It was very, very dirty, very falling down, and kids at school made fun of him for living in the crappy house. She's a single mom with 3 male children, and her family that she came from was alcoholics who were very abusive to her. And so cycles of generational trauma. She's also an alcoholic. She's also abusive to her kids. So that's what we're dealing with, this ongoing generational cycle of trauma and alcoholism and abuse. And the researchers were extremely skeptical at first because of the conditions, the way she talked. She sounded crazy. And so they went in kind of like, yeah, I don't think this is real. I think this is someone with psychological problems.
Which is something to think about, because I think that might happen a lot, and it muddies the waters of those that are telling the truth and are having real experiences.
Yeah, and that's part of like also the issue of why the UCLA center got shut down, was because of this mixture of, people with mental illnesses thinking that they have gifts, which in some ways people with mental illnesses do have gifts. So that's a whole nother thing, but also fraudsters. It's just really hard to figure out what is real and what is not. So there's a really negative vibe in the house. In this research I read, the boys had a lot of negative, resentful feelings towards their mother. Understandably, if they're being abused, you have a right to have negative, resentful feelings towards your mother. Paranormal researchers, though, tend to believe that physically and verbally abusive environments are lightning rods for poltergeist-like activity.
Wow, I did not know that.
And poltergeist-like activity is when you as a person are kind of manifesting this weird phenomenon in your environment, like me and the flickering lights, which is a whole thing that we're going to get into. So Doris said that there were 3 spirits in the house that would physically attack her and even sexually assault her.
What?
She and the children would bump into these ghosts while they're walking around, and people outside the family also said that they saw apparitions. The ghosts, in some of the research, the ghosts are described as resembling Asian men, but in the interview I read with the adult grown son, he said they didn't look like Asian men. He doesn't know where that came from. The children named one of the more prominent ghosts Mr. Who's It, because he would be there all the time. And Doris was very, very specific in her descriptions of how the ghost would rape her. The 2 smaller beings would hold her down, and the tallest one would rape her. Doris's older son said that he had seen his mother tossed around the room and even tried to intervene. And in this interview, that was 2009. So the adult son is being interviewed in 2009. He was asked, okay, was this all happening? Did this really happen? And the adult son is like, yes, I was there. I saw it. It really happened. He's kind of like has this attitude like he's bored with it. It's a traumatic part of his childhood.
Well, I'm sure he doesn't want to think about it anymore.
As an adult, he can confirm it. It kind of reminds me of did you hear about the story of the kids in the African school that got visited by a UFO?
No.
Oh my God, you have to look this up.
Okay.
I think it's called the Ariel School. These kids at this African school were visited by a UFO. They remember it as kids. They drew pictures of the UFO and the alien that visited them. The alien told them that it was really important for them to take care of the environment, and because humans were destroying the planet. And The kids then were interviewed after they'd grown up, like in their 30s, and they're like, yeah, totally straight up remember every single thing that was happening. It was real. It was not my imagination. We got visited by UFO, by aliens. The aliens told us to take care of the planet because humans were destroying the planet. So it's like that. It's like when the kid remembers it, because sometimes I make up little stories when I was a kid, but it's like if I remember it as an adult and I'm like, no, actually that really happened, then...
And we know children see things that we as adults have become blind to. Children sense things, they see things, they hear things.
Yeah. So, and again, because Doris was an alcoholic dealing with a lot, kind of unstable, they didn't believe her at first when she told these rape stories, but then they saw the bruises on the inside of her thighs and legs. The investigators set up high-speed cameras and even brought in professional photographers. And in one instance, they set up Doris in a small bedroom and asked Doris to help them bring forth the beings. She began swearing and yelling at the spirits, while about 30 investigators were all crammed in this room. Lights started appearing in the room as Doris continued provoking them. A greenish mist appeared in one corner. A man's upper torso became visible in the greenish mist. None of the photographs, though, were successful in capturing this, but there were photos that showed an arc of light in the middle of the room, as well as some orbs. And you can look this up online and you can see these photos online. And in fact, these photos were published in like a legitimate photography magazine as like the first ever paranormal photos that were published in like a legit photography magazine.
So they were reviewed by
people. They were reviewed by photographers who know, lens problems and exposure problems and developing problems, and they're like, this looks legit. The oldest son said that certain music would intensify the paranormal activity, in particular Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
I think so.
And the investigators noticed that the light orbs did increase when this type of music was played. Carey said he could hear a whispering voice repeat, "Kiss me, kill me," just before a flower pot heaved across the room and crashed into the center of the group, nearly missing their heads. Right?
That's incredible.
Witnessed by people.
Yeah.
So all of this activity was observed for about 2.5 months until the activity began to decrease. After Doris left her Culver City home, the phenomenon ceased to exist there. Future residents of the house have not reported anything. I looked up the house on Google Maps, and it's very cute right now. You can see a photo online of the 1974 version of the house, which was looking really, really bad. But now the house looks really, really cute. It's like painted like white and black, and it's all just very nicely kept up. And I'm sure it's worth $1 million right now.
Is it in a nice neighborhood?
I mean, it's like a little Culver City, little, but it's kind of by the freeway, so that's not great, but it's cute. It's like a,
And there's definitely residents, obviously.
There's neighborhoods. If you own a house, you're probably a gamillionaire in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And by house, you mean a studio, because really one room is probably worth $1 million.
Yeah. Doris claimed that the phenomenon followed her as she moved from Culver City to Carson. Again, she moved to another really rundown house in Carson, then to San Bernardino, to Texas, and back to San Bernardino. Barry and Carey spent a total of 10 weeks studying the case. It would inspire a novel called The Entity by Frank De Felitta, which would be made into a movie in 1982 starring Barbara Hershey. Doris died in 1995 of multiple organ failure and cardiopulmonary failure. She was still very young, just in her 50s, but alcoholism
and who knows what the effect was, the true lasting effect of that level of a haunting and that level of a trauma experience and the fear that went through her.
Yeah.
Who knows what damage that did.
And just all that negativity.
Oh, yeah.
So let's do a little explainer on poltergeist activity. The word poltergeist comes from German, meaning knocking spirit. Poltern means to knock, and geist means spirit. According to Alan Kardec, the founder of Spiritism. Poltergeists are manifestations of disembodied spirits of low level belonging to, he has different classes and orders, but belonging to like a low level order that's kind of associated with fire, earth, air, water, like those elements. It's part of psychokinetic energy, which is the ability for an individual to influence a physical system, like the world, things you can touch, without actually physically interacting with it. So changing the environment with your mind. And between 1979 and 1981, a survey polled 1,700 Americans on their beliefs, and 28% of males and 31% of females agreed that it is possible to influence the world through the mind alone. So I don't know, do you believe in psychokinetic
I do
ability?
believe it. I was just listening to something last night actually about it. And so it's interesting, no coincidence. You're talking about it right now, because there's been several clairvoyants that said where we're at right now with AI and our phones and everything, that we're being completely, brainwashed, quite frankly. And you have to wonder, what do entities think of our current computer and phone world and AI? Are they using any of that to come through to us? Because we know electronic media. So now we're at a next level of electronic media. I think that they might be going, yippee, we can really reach out to people more than we used to.
It's cool. And I'm just in a place where I'm like working on increasing my psychic abilities and stuff. And I've noticed weird things.
You
it's
have
cool.
more. You're more aware.
I have a lot of stories.
That's what we're here for.
So the cool thing about Barry Taff actually is still alive. Carrie Gaynor was still alive. Carrie Gaynor, like I said, is hypnotherapist to the stars and helps people overcome addictions, especially focused on smoking. But maybe you could get a little help from Carrie Gaynor on fear of flying if that comes up.
Yes.
And Barry Taff, things are kind of hard for Barry right now. He has had some health problems, dealing with homelessness, dealing with a lot of really hard things. There's even a GoFundMe I found his friends set up for him. And he's living in a hotel right now. And so his friends are helping him with his GoFundMe. So the story of the UCLA Parapsychology Lab researchers is still ongoing. I hope that Barry's story ends with a happy ending.
I hope it does too, because
I bought his book. I was hoping it would come before the podcast, but it didn't.
Well, we can revisit this.
So I can't wait
We'll both have to read it and revisit.
And maybe if the podcast, of course the podcast is going to continue, but maybe we could have Barry on and interview him at some point.
That would be incredible.
Yeah, about his book.
We're all intrigued now.
Yeah. So that is the story of Doris Bither and the entities at 11547 Braddock Drive in Culver City. I can't wait to drive by.
Yeah, we got to do that.
And pull out some tarot cards and see if I feel anything. As someone who is toying into the psychic realm, there are definitely fake psychics out there.
Lots of them.
And there are times where I feel like I can connect with something. And there are times where people tell me this area is really heavy in thing. Like there's this doll at this local occult store that is supposed to be a haunted doll, and I don't feel anything from it at all.
I wonder if it's the same one, because I went to a live show one time a few years back with a haunted doll. Felt nothing, saw nothing. I don't know. Doll might have been having a bad day or a good day, as case may be,
or whatever. The energy doesn't connect with mine.
Right.
Because someone who was there with said that she felt something.
Well, the person I was with did not either, but there were people in the audience that said they did. So but we were basically like this, just looking at that doll while other people were talking, going, is she moving? Is her eye? Because they were waiting too.
Yeah.
So we're all in a different place at a different time in our lives, where you might have higher vibrations than others and lower vibrations than you used to have. So I think it's all it's individual,
Yeah, I will tell you a really cool story where I came into contact with something where I wasn't expecting it. So Some acquaintances lived at the Betty Davis house, which is my favorite house ever. And they were having a New Year's party. And so I went over there, and I just am there to admire the house because I just love it so much. It's got a barn. It's all brick. It's like an English Tudor style storybook little house. Lots of greenery, lots of brick, just gorgeous. But small and cozy. It's not like a huge mansion. And so we were sitting in the kitchen talking, and all of a sudden I feel like my throat chakra like tighten up, and I'm like, that's weird. And then I start hiccuping randomly, and I turned to the girl and I was like, is this house haunted? Have you ever noticed a ghost here? And she was like, yeah, actually, I was just sitting exactly where you were sitting like the other day, and I started hiccuping there too.
What?
And I was like, you have to tell me all the stories. And she said, her bedroom's up on the second floor, and when she moved in, she like had her bed in a certain position, but she kept on getting woken up in the middle of the night, like almost feeling like she was being shooken awake. And she's like, okay, I guess I got to move my bed. So she moved her bed, and then like that didn't happen anymore. So, but she definitely feels that there's an entity in there.
Has there ever been any reports of Betty actually showing up there as an entity, or
not that I know
connections
of? I was just talking to the person who lived there, and I didn't talk to the parents. I just was talking to the girl. So there might be additional stories. Sure. I don't know, but I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that was very cool.
A lot of help. So tell us your Hollywood history story.
I have one I want to share with you and everybody listening. Speaking of icons like Betty Davis, I had the experience of being in the room that Marilyn Monroe grew up in at the orphanage in Hollywood. Look,
the light just flickered again.
It did.
And I feel like that was a different light.
It was a different light. For sure, it was over here.
Wow, that's amazing. That one's my light that flickers, and that other one was your light flickers.
Oh my God, we have our own lights, you guys. We have our own flickering lights.
That's so cool.
It's an interesting story to the point where it's been heard by Marilyn's own voice in recordings of past, to where today Hollywood tour guides still take tour buses in front of this. Now it's called Uplift Family Services, and they're a charity organization. And
do you know how old Marilyn was when she lived there?
She was dropped off there by her grandmother at the age of 10 when her mother went into the asylum.
And whereabouts is this? Like
it's right down the street from Paramount Studios, which is what makes the story so amazing. If you have to kind of wonder what brings an artist to face dreams that for most don't work out and are challenging. And it is not easy to want to be a professional actor or writer or director, any of that. And I like to think that the experience that we hear about that Marilyn had was she kind of manifested it, I think. She had a mother that couldn't raise her. Her grandmother didn't want to raise her. And I do not know the specifics of why her grandmother did not keep her. But in any event, Holly Grove was one of the first orphanages in Hollywood, in Southern California, that opened in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And the building it's very interesting. It's just a few blocks from Paramount Studios. You can drive by it. It is gated, and she was brought there to live. And the room that was her bedroom and bathroom, they have left the bathroom exactly as it was back then. And most of the bedroom is now a private office for Uplift Family Services. Interesting that Marilyn never had children, and we all have read how she wanted them so badly and miscarried. And now the place where she grew up is Uplift Family Services, that is a nonprofit charity that helps children, foster children, kids in need, etc., with all kinds of amazing programs. In fact, their fundraising gala is called the Norma Jean Gala. So I had the good fortune of one of the rare opportunities to actually get to be in the room. It's a private office. You don't just get to go in. It's not open for tours. But Carly, I work as Mrs. Claus sometimes around Christmas time. I've done that for 9 years. And several times the people at Uplift hired me as Mrs. Claus to come and read stories to the children. Mm-hmm. And one of the people that worked there said, we were talking about Marilyn. She said, well, that's my office and it's haunted. And I said, really? And she said, everybody that's worked here for years knows that Marilyn is here, or at least spends a lot of time here, that things happen, things fall off shelves, that type of thing that should not in that room. But she said it was a peaceful place. She didn't feel scared. What's really interesting is I've been in there a couple of times now. I was in there recently, earlier this year, and you look out her bedroom window, and now there's some trees that block it, but it is a direct eye line just a few blocks down of the famous water tower at Paramount Studios.
The Paramount water tower with the Paramount logo on it. And as someone who, I ride my bike by Paramount every day I bike to work, it's the most beautiful, studio there is. I mean, it's just gorgeous with the arches and the... Yeah,
it's an amazing looking studio, and it is different than all the other studios that we have in town.
And every time I ride my bike by, I'm like, wouldn't it be amazing to make a movie on that lot, shoot something on that lot?
Yeah. The light just flickered again. Wow. Yeah, and I think the light bulbs are good. So
the light it really just brightened up.
It did.
Really, when I said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of like the spotlight on Marilyn that she eventually, as I like to think, manifested, because she was a perfect example of not being set up to have the opportunities that she had, but she made them happen. But the women that work there, and you can hear in some recordings of Marilyn's own voice, she talked about looking out that window and staring at the Paramount Tower, thinking, how can I get over that fence? And I like to think that in my mind, that is a literal and a figurative fence. How could she get out of that?
She probably got abused by men and exploited by men in terrible ways.
In terrible ways, yes. We've heard the stories of, there are countless stories of the abuse. I think Joe DiMaggio even, there was reports that he abused her.
And he talked terrible. He said terrible
things about her.
Yeah.
But I like to think that she found some peace in that room, because when I was in there, despite the situation that brought her there, I felt a peace, and I felt something in there. So I've been in there.
Describe the feeling.
The feeling is sort of interesting in that I walked in, and I had been in many rooms of the offices of the location, and you walked in and you just felt different in that room. You felt a different energy. You felt special. Or if not myself feeling special, you felt someone special had been in there, or the room was special. There was just something different that you walked into from the hallway. It was completely different. And I took a friend, and he felt the very same thing. And we basically compared notes when we came out. He said, I'd never been in there before. That was something. I said, did you feel it? And he said, yeah, don't even know what it was, but it was different. You feel a peace, though. I felt some kind of hope. I didn't feel like, oh, this poor little girl. And so I think that is because Marilyn had hope. Marilyn looked at that tower, and that was a beacon of hope for her. I kind of think, in a way, maybe, I hate to say this, but you don't want a child in an orphanage. But that was her journey, and would she have gone where she had gone if she had stayed home with her mother?
I mean, I think there's so many kids who need to be separated from their parents.
Absolutely. There's so many people shouldn't be parents.
I know.
So I just, her journey that led her to an orphanage at that young, impressionable age, was that the catalyst of hope that really drove her? Because I think a lot of kids in that situation, there wouldn't be the drive.
Yeah.
She did have the drive,
Yeah.
She did. We know that from Hollywood history about her. But I will say the woman that is one of the executives that are at this location for Uplift, I mean, she recounted the same stories that the previous woman had years before. She said, yeah, it's haunted. She goes, I've seen lots of stuff.
And so what are some of these stories?
The biggest thing that she remembered was that things fall off, things, glassware, that kind of thing. Things get moved a lot, get chills. You sense a presence in the room behind her, like someone's in there, and you turn around and no one's in there. So she looks at stuff like that. And they've kept the window set up so that where the desk is, you can still see that eye line.
Nice.
So you can still see the tower. And what's kind of neat is most people don't get to go in there. And so I felt very honored and, very grateful that they were kind enough to share that with me, because that's not a regular Hollywood tour right there.
Yeah.
That is not.
Wow.
It's very interesting, and it does make you this iconic woman that everybody knows. There's just always another story to hear about her, right? Isn't it just endless?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
So we got to wrap things up. What are you hopeful for? What are you working on? What are your ambitions in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, I am trying to recreate a script that I have lost, and it's a paranormal script, and it's set in a location that I don't want to give out yet, but it is in an iconic Hollywood location that's now an apartment building, but has a really neat history. And so I have just met with somebody who wants to work on it as a short film, which I think would be really fun. And then because of the time of year, I'm gearing up to do, Santa and Mrs. Claus work. So, and then I, of course, have a bad Mrs. Claus. I have two Mrs. Clauses, Carly.
That's cute.
She has an alter ego. One of them's not for children.
I love this so much.
Bad Mrs. Claus is ornery. She's had it with Santa.
Can people get cameos?
Yes.
Are you doing cameos
I
again?
am doing cameos again. So if you go, Bad Mrs. Claus is as of right now, the only Bad Mrs. Claus I know of is on Cameo. And then the Santa and Mrs. Claus, you can also, if you would like a traditional experience with Santa and Mrs. Claus, that's there too.
Excellent.
What about you? What are you working on?
Well, I'm really hopeful for this podcast.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening to the first episode. We will be sharing memes and hilarity on our Instagram, Haunted Hollywood Hour, all one word on Instagram. If you all are familiar with my other podcast, Our Flag Means Fan Fiction, that's still going strong and going to be coming to you every week. But this is my second podcast, going to be coming to you every week.
That's so exciting. And even though some may say, well, there's a lot of podcasts and shows about this genre, I think everybody has a special story that nobody else has heard before, right?
And I think everyone tells a story in a different, unique way.
Sure.
And I look forward to us, because we live in Hollywood, that we can go to these locations and maybe have some Instagram lives, some YouTube lives.
Yes, wouldn't that be
the locations
fun?
And
some special guests too. We've already thought of a few.
Yeah,
that would be really interesting. That we think you all would love to hear from.
Yeah, and do some tarot readings and do some. This is going to be a work that kind of is amorphous, but is going to explore all the things that we think are cool, which are the weird, paranormal, amazing stories.
And history. There's so much interesting history that just since we discussed doing this that have kind of come to both of us, just historical stuff. Maybe we'll talk about, I just heard about apartment buildings in Hollywood that a friend of mine lives in one of them, and they both used to be male and female dormitories for Paramount Studio contract actors. Men had to stay on one side, the women had to stay on their side of the dorms. But did they?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. There might be some interesting ghost stories there, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of history.
So I'm glad that we'll get to preserve the history that we're passionate about in the form of this podcast, and find out and uncover all sorts of tales that maybe haven't been talked about enough. Including Thelma Moss. After learning about Thelma Moss, I'm like, I am fascinated. She seems like our kind of gal.
She does, yeah.
And I want to learn more about her, so I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of more research about her.
Very cool, very cool. We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And it's fun work. So wonder if anybody out there might have some stories they want us to look into as well.
Oh, yeah. You guys, if you guys have stories that you want us to talk about and cover, email us at hauntedhollywoodhour@gmail.com, or you could DM us on our Instagram, Haunted Hollywood Hour, all one word. And we'll have a YouTube channel, Haunted Hollywood Hour on YouTube. And follow us on wherever you follow your podcasts, and be sure to leave us a rating and a review if you like us.
Thanks so much, Carly. This was fun, and thanks for everybody for listening.
Until next time.
Bye.